Adams made a trip up to Albany today to meet with state lawmakers about his agenda, including mayoral control of the city's public schools and the city's speed camera program. That trip comes as lawmakers begin to wrap up the legislative session, which is scheduled to end on June 2nd. Here now to talk about that and the newly proposed redistricting maps, we've got State Senate Deputy Majority Leader Mike Gianaris. He represents parts of Queens from Astoria to Woodhaven, at least for now. Welcome back to the program. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Errol.
Yeah, let me ask you about the mayor's trip first. What's going to happen as far as mayoral control, in your opinion?
Well, I think there's a desire to keep it going in some form. Nobody wants to go back to the system we had 2 decades ago, which was changed because it had all sorts of problems associated with it. The question are the details. Is there something that we need to do to increase parental involvement, community involvement in this process, strengthening the community education councils? But I don't think anyone's talking about getting rid of the concept of mayoral control. It's just tweaking it to give local communities some more influence.
Would it be fair to say that, ironically, had he showed more interest and showed up more frequently, you might feel less inclined to feel like you have to exercise tighter control over the schools?
No, look, we look at all these things on the merits. Remember, a number of us know Mayor Adams from when he was a state senator with us here in Albany. And so I don't put too much stake in whether he's physically here or not. We know the issue. We talk to him and his administration on a regular basis. Obviously, his presence helps. It was good that he was here today. He was talking to our relevant chairs of the committees that will have jurisdiction over this issue. But ultimately, we're going to do what we think is in the best interest of the children and the families of New York City as it relates to the school system.
When it comes to speed cameras, on the merits, it seems to a lot of people that, you know, there's no reason to stop them after 5 o'clock or on the weekends and so forth. But to get them in place in the first instance required a political compromise that included those items. Is any of that going to change, do you think?
I think so. And Senator Gianaris, I know the name sounds similar, but he's a colleague from Brooklyn, has been at the forefront of this issue, and he's been advocating very hard for an expansion of the times that these speed cameras are functioning. Remember, initially they were set up to be something that would protect areas around the public schools during school hours, which is why they weren't functioning really in the nighttime hours. And now that we're seeing how they're working, there's a discussion about expanding the hours of operation because it does work and keeps people from speeding, which ultimately makes pedestrians and even the drivers safer.
Speaking of legislative compromises, it was 10 years ago, and I remember you voted against this, but there was a deal between the legislature and then Governor Andrew Cuomo to put in place the procedures, the redistricting commission, the consequences for not abiding by it and so forth, the amendment to the state constitution that ended up tripping everybody up this time around. Did you foresee something like this? Is that why you voted against it 10 years ago?
Well, we foresaw exactly what happening. That was a deal between the Senate Republicans who were in charge back then and Andrew Cuomo. What we said at the time was this is designed to fail. It was set up to be equally divided between representatives of the two parties. So, of course, what we predicted came to fruition. They were deadlocked 5 against 5. They were unable to function and ultimately were unsuccessful in even presenting us lines. Which, of course, led us to this point where we're at today, which has created confusion, multiple primary dates, and the court taking over the process.
If you could do it again, would you handle things differently this time?
It's a good question. I've heard people ask it. I mean, I would have handled it differently 10 years ago when this process was set up. But once we had the process before us, I'm not sure what else we could have done. The commission failed. Our option at that point was to step forward and try and fill that void. We did that. The courts ultimately decided that we weren't empowered to even do that. So it didn't even matter what lines we drew. The court said we had no power to enact any lines of any kind, which is why the Senate lines were knocked out, even though there was a finding that there was insufficient evidence that we had gerrymandered on the state Senate. So here we are. The court has chosen to take over the process. That's what we're dealing with right now, and we'll all live under the lines that are approved.
I noticed and have mentioned it a couple of times tonight that communities of interest were not necessarily taken into account by the special master. Was he allowed to? Was he supposed to?
He was certainly supposed to. There's a number of criteria that exist for the first time in New York, and one of them was protecting communities of interest. And what defines a community of interest is subject to disagreement and debate. But there were certainly a number of places where we think that was not done. You've heard Congressman Jeffries speak very clearly and loudly about that himself. So we're making our case. There's additional submissions before the special map drawer that are due tomorrow, and then on Friday these lines will be final. So we'll see what comes out of the final step in this process.
What's your sense, based on the preliminary look at the new state Senate lines, what's your sense of whether or not Democrats will hold a majority or indeed a supermajority come November?
Well, you have to take a look at where we are and how we got here. We are currently living under grossly gerrymandered lines that the Republicans drew 10 years ago. Part of that deal you mentioned to set up the commission also involved Governor Cuomo approving the lines that the Senate Republicans themselves drew. So they are grossly gerrymandered. We have achieved a supermajority under Republican-drawn lines. So anything that moves us in the direction of fairness, which I think the lines proposed yesterday are certainly better than the lines we're living under currently, will yield those kinds of results. So, for example, we have 2 new districts that were proposed within the bounds of New York City that deals with some of the shenanigans the Republicans pulled by overpopulating the city districts and underpopulating the upstate districts, so there were more senators upstate. That is being repaired. So that kind of thing will help us. I think ultimately we're very secure in our majority. Of course, we are always challenged every 2 years. A lot of money gets thrown at us because, in a sense, we're the new kids in town. The change in the state Senate in 2019 was really what changed the power dynamic in this state and allowed us to achieve so many progressive accomplishments. So we fully expect to be targeted again. We always come through. We have the largest majority in state history, and we hope to continue that.
Okay, we've got less than a minute left, but let me ask you about your district. And I know you know all of these streets by heart, and I'm sure you've looked at this, these shapes in great detail. But it looks like your district is going to extend a little bit less far into Queens than it had before, and it's going to be a little fatter in the middle. Is that a district you're comfortable with? You know all of those neighborhoods?
Yeah, well, look, I was born in that district. I grew up in that district. I have lived in that district my entire life. And I've represented about half of it for the last decade in the state Senate. Again, ultimately, the master service sliced the district north and south. So there's a western part and eastern part is basically cut in half. But I do live in the eastern part in District 12. That's where I'll be running, and I'm very confident that the people that know me want me to return, and the people that don't know me will work hard to get to know them.
Okay. We'll wish you the best of luck on the campaign trail and beyond. Thanks so much for spending some time with us tonight.
Always a pleasure, Errol. Thank you.
Okay, that's going to do it for tonight's show. Thanks for watching and have a great evening. We'll see you next time inside City.